and we're going to be having a conversation about the feminine, the voice, the rising voice of the feminine, the wisdom of the feminine. So I look forward to hearing some of your thoughts and perceptions. I'm waiting for the hubbub to subside. Hi, how are you guys? All right, thank you for coming to this afternoon. Of all the many yummy things to do, it's funny, I felt like my talk today was a perfect example of the wild side of wild mercy. You know, that's what I'm calling my new book, Wild Mercy, living the fierce and tender teachings of the women mystics. And so I got the wild part this afternoon, but I ran out of time for the other part. Not that it wasn't infused with the energy of tenderness, but it was a little chaotic. So I look forward to the opportunity now to hone in on some of the things that I would have loved to have shared and didn't ever get to. So I'm going to lead with one thing, and then I'd love to open it up for some of your questions and reflections. So, you know, if we're talking about non-duality, then isn't masculine and feminine, the distinction between the masculine and feminine, a dualistic one? No, it's not. I'm not sure I can tell you exactly why, except that what I have experienced, and as I said earlier, it took me a while to get to this, is that within the very heart of manifest reality, of immanence, is this portal or this gateway or this invitation into connectedness with all that is. And that is the path of the feminine. The feminine, if the feminine is immanence, if the masculine is transcendence, and the feminine is immanence, and I'm not asking you to buy into those propositions, but just see how they feel, then every particle of being is infused with the one, and the way we connect with the one is relational, which is the way of the feminine. And so one of the reasons I'm so in love with the poetry of the mystics is it bypasses all of those kinds of all the distinctions that the rational mind wants to make, and dispenses with argumentation and goes straight to the place where we ache for connection. And in that very longing that the poetry evokes, the mystics of all spiritual traditions, duality naturally seems to dissolve. Like when you read a good poem, let me read one. Should I just read one? And remember, I feel that mystics come in many forms, and they aren't always known. They aren't always familiar. I wonder if I left that poem on the podium. I think I must have. But luckily I have a whole bag of poems here. Well, how about if yeah, I did. I left everything, all my notes. Oh, no, here they are. Oh, good. Here we go. This is I Mask by Denise Levertov, who I think was a Jewish woman who, like me, fell in love with Christ. Not to the exclusion of her Judaism, but inclusive. I mask. In this dark I rest, unready for the light which dawns day after day, eager to be shared. Black silk, shelter me. I need more of the night before I open eyes and heart to illumination. I must still grow in the dark like a root, not ready at all. Eye mask. In this dark I rest, unready for the light which dawns day after day, eager to be shared. Black silk, shelter me. I need more of the night before I open eyes and heart to illumination. I must still grow in the dark like a root, not ready at all. Now we could have conveyed that discursively with prosaic language and say something like, there are periods in our spiritual lives when we must rest in not knowing and not rush in to fill that empty space with answers, but abide in a liminal space until it is time to know again. Even that was probably too lyrical for the comparison that I am wishing to make. I can't help it, I'm a poet. So the difference is that discursive language, of course, attempts to as accurately as possible, describe something objectively so that there can be some kind of agreement, perhaps, or proof. And it often uses those vague pronouns like we. I just wrote a whole book and tried really hard to not say the royal we, that. How do I know? I do sometimes say you, which is way more presumptuous, but way more intimate. But poetry knocks on the door. My father, may his memory be a blessing, who was an alcoholic, hippie, drug addict, totally absent but totally present kind of dad. Read my memoir, Caravan of No Despair, and you'll get my dad. A crazy wisdom dude. And he would say, he wasn't very good at parenting. Like, he let me get a tattoo at 14, and this was in the 70s. Hitchhike, live with a guy much older than me, those kinds of things that aren't so much intact. But he had other gifts, and one of the gifts was his love of poetry. And he said that the first time you read a poem, you knock on the door. The second time, you have to read a poem 3 times. The second time you read the poem, the door opens. And if you're willing to take the risk and read it a 3rd time, you enter into the poem. So the landscape of poetry actually is a very feminine landscape, isn't it? That's why all my favorite male poets, I call them feminine mystics. John of the Cross, Rilke, Rumi, Hafiz. Saint Francis of Assisi wasn't much of a poet, but a little bit, and he was definitely a feminine mystic in my mind, in the body of a man. So the last thing I want to say, and then I want to open it up, is that the reason for me there is no distinction between the devotional state and the non-dual state is that they're absolutely, in my experience, reciprocal. When we are given the gift of those non-dual states, those unitive states of consciousness, they're states of the heart, where we experience our felt connection with all that is, and there are no boundaries. It's an undifferentiated state. When we can't seem to, while we're here in form, remain in that undifferentiated state all the time. Perhaps some people can. Ramana Maharshi, maybe he lived there all the time. Maybe Anandamaya Ma lived there all the time. But most of us experience those fleeting states of unitive consciousness, of heart connectedness. And then the impulse when we return to so-called ordinary states of consciousness, wherein ideally we retain the fragrance of that unitive state, our impulse is to either long for God, painfully long for the one, or celebrate the one through devotional, that outpouring of the heart, that devotional space of love. And so one feeds into the other, and then next thing we know, by virtue of engaging in that sweet separation of longing and praising, if we show up for it, we find ourselves abiding once again in that space where those boundaries dissolve, and we melt into that which we love, and all that's left is love. So that's what else I would like to have said, is that the distinction between non-duality and devotion is a dualistic, artificial distinction. Your turn.
Thank you, Mirabai.
Thank you.
So what I'm feeling here, listening to you touch into that mystery of devotion and on the non-dual, is in those moments that you describe of the heart where I have an experience of only oneness, but then the voice just really goes into the thank you.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. So it's thank you, which is one of the most natural, involuntary, delicious expressions. Has that question mark. Who am I addressing?
Right.
Yeah, so it's just to say just exactly what you're saying,
Yeah.
Because I feel like I can't imagine ever not dancing with thank you. I mean, it's like, yeah.
That's Ramakrishna's, sugar. I don't want to just become sugar. I want to taste sugar. And why not? Yeah. And I think even you're onto something. The thank you is not other than being one with the one. It is a natural response, as you say, to that state of love. I mean, when I talk about the coldness of just pure non-dual teachings, I'm talking about when it's just about consciousness and it's not about the heart and it's not about love. I'm not actually that interested. I don't want to just be sugar. I want to taste sugar. I want to give thanks for sugar. So thank you for your reflection. How are you guys doing? I know it's stuffy in here and you're sleepy and it's late. You want to stand up and move your body around for a minute? Let's do that. Breathe. Just maybe inhale and stretch up. Here we are in this embodied experience. Maybe exhale and very gently fold down and let it out all the air. Sorry if I'm messing up the recording here. Maybe again, inhale all the way. Maybe hold the inhalation for a moment and then gently let it all go. Thank you. Better? Okay. So nice to see men here. Thank you so much, brothers, for being here.
It is so wonderful to be here and be here with you. I loved everything you shared earlier.
Thank you.
So my name's Rick. And first of all, I want to thank you because you brought into the conference something I had experienced as missing, which was the devotional. the worship. There's so much about consciousness and non-duality, and if you really got the meditation right, then you'd be one with the one. And so let's go do a sitting meditation again of various kinds. And you brought in just such a beautiful additional, just a wonderful portion to it.
Thank you, Rick.
So I have struggled with worship of the divine, because it's like, God doesn't need us to praise. I mean, what are we, buttering up God? But it's something in the act of worshiping that opens us in a different way
Yeah.
to oneness
Yeah, exactly.
with God. And you brought that in.
Oh,
So first I want to say thank you.
thanks.
And then I struggle with, there's so many paths. How can this community hold all of these? For some people, worship is not their path.
Yeah.
So if you could speak to that, how do we, first of all, appreciation, and then how do we hold that there are so many paths for those for whom that kind of devotional, heartfelt
Right.
peace is not their path?
Yeah, good question. So I've often said that my whole life I've been madly in love with a God that I don't believe in. So belief systems, as it turns out, are not only dispensable, but sometimes get in the way of an actual relationship and intimacy with the beloved. And so even the term worship may be too religiously loaded. Maybe even adoration might work. So, of course, the yoga, one of the things I love about Hinduism is how inclusive and expansive it is. And there are at least 4 major yogas, of course, in some systems, many more. But they're all about our soul temperament. They reflect the temperaments of our souls. And for many of us, they combine. But the bhakti path, the path of devotion, is not for everyone, although it seems to be the broadest raft, to use a Buddhist term, that holds the most passengers. It's the most commonly engaged yoga. But there's Jnana Yoga, the path of using the mind to transcend the mind. It's for those of us who are more introspective and philosophical and inclined toward perhaps meditation. And then there's Karma Yoga for those of us who are active and want to get off our ass and off the cushion and into the world and being of service, finding the beloved through everything we do, praising God through every act becomes a prayer, a practice, a spiritual practice. And then there are all this actual practices that are designed to transform consciousness in the 4th branch of Raja Yoga. And as I said, many of us are a little bit of everything, just as many of us are finding that we cannot put down our roots in a single spiritual tradition. Remember the phrase that so many of us heard. I heard it a lot in the 70s when I was a teenager and starting on my spiritual path was, it's very nice that you're drawn to all of these different spiritual traditions, but eventually, dear, you're going to have to pick one so that you can go deep. And I spent decades feeling like there was something wrong with me because I was temperamentally incapable of committing to a single tradition, not because I'm commitment phobic, but or only spiritually promiscuous, although I do tend in that direction, but because it felt like setting down my anchor in any one spiritual tradition was a violation of my covenant with my beloved, because I was excluding all the many ways to be with the one I love. By saying I can only find you here, I was saying, no, I'm not interested. You're not welcome in all these other spaces. I couldn't do it. So I think that temperamentally, what's happening in this emerging spiritual landscape in which we find ourselves is that there's a much more integrated impulse, so that we're yana yogis and we're bhaktas and we're non-dualists and we are devotional and we're in love with Christ, and we have a very deep Buddhist meditation framework that we hang our practice on every day, and none of it is exclusive, and this is the thing. It is not shallow. It is not superficial. We're not being dilettantes, which is what some of us are accused of. We're having profound, deep, transformational encounters in multiple spiritual spaces. And I feel like there's something feminine about this expansive impulse that I'm seeing in the larger spiritual community that is saying, yes, hineni, here I am. I'm not going to try to bend the world to my will and my belief systems. I'm going to show up and with tenderness and curiosity for what is. That was a very long answer. Thank you. Kirk, I'm so glad you're doing this and not me, because I
Thanks, Kirk.
have a hard time calling on people.
So I missed the beginning of your chat earlier, so I'm sorry if this has already been covered. But I'm wondering if you have a memory of the first poem that really moved you and how it moved you.
Oh my goodness. I think it was Belinda lives in a little white house with a little yellow dog and a little white mouse. And she had a realio trulio little magic dragon. But no, that's probably not what you're looking for. Okay. I think it was, I all poems, but I think the one that broke open my heart was probably not such a good, or at least an arcane translation of the opening lines of the Mathnawi by Mevlana Jalaluddin Rumi when I was 16. And it was something like, listen to the song of the reed. Ever since I was cut from my reed bed, my cry has set to tears all the women and all the men. I want a heart that is torn by separation, that I may, okay, I don't remember the rest. So in my new book, Wild Mercy, I had to quote that because it sparked something in me that set the rest of my life on fire. And I don't want to call him out, but the translator of the version that I did use is here. And I'm not looking at him, so I don't want to put him on the spot. But what comes after, could you just say those opening lines? Thank you, Kabir. Sheikh Kabir in the Mevlavi Sheikh.
How does it go?
Listen.
Listen to the reed and the tale it tells, how it sings of separation. Ever since they tore me from the reed bed, my wail has caused men and women to weep. I want a heart torn open with longing so I can relate the pain of this love. Whoever has been parted from his source longs to be reunited. I should be able to remember more, but that's the beginning.
Thank you.
Then he says, let me try and go a little further. Sure.
Actually, 3 times.
3 times? Yeah. Maybe more of it will be remembered as I get into it. Listen to the reed and the tale it tells, how it sings of separation. Ever since they tore me from the reed bed, my wail has caused men and women to weep. I want a heart torn open with longing to relate the pain of this love. Whoever has been parted from her source longs to be reunited. This flute, and I'm jumping a little bit, this flute is played with fire, not with air. Mm. And without this fire, you would not exist. I'm sorry, I don't.
That's perfect.
I have some breaks in my memory.
No,
but as long as I'm up and standing and have the microphone. I wanted to say, I was delighted to come in, and I came humbly to learn about the divine feminine. But I was happy that you were talking about poetry, which is also my life, especially in, writing and translation. And I've been thinking about poetry and what is it? And I've searched for some definitions of it. So I'm going to offer two definitions. The first is, and these are ones that I found useful. Poetry is intensified language. Okay? But that's not enough. Poetry is to say one thing and mean another. Now, I was going to ask you, why is so much spiritual poetry so bad? Especially the poetry of gurus. It's usually horror. Am I right? You agree with me?
Totally right. I have been asked to write forewords for gurus' books.
Yeah,
of poetry.
I get those all the time.
Fine.
Yeah.
And one more definition. Sure. I don't know how you want to do this with the mics. We could.
Okay, let me just finish where I was going with this. So, poetry is to say one thing and mean another. You were saying that poetry is of the feminine, and I have to object. But I'd say poetry without
You're not mansplaining, are you?
You tell me. Okay. I'm here to learn. But I would say poetry without the feminine is not fully poetry. And I would say where we make the connection comes back to this definition, that poetry is to say one thing and mean another. The beauty of Rumi's poetry so often is that he anchors meaning in concrete images.
Yeah.
But again, it's to say one thing and mean another. He doesn't mean those concrete images because, and let's call that the feminine side of the poetry.
Yeah.
I think poetry to really work we need to be given images, metaphors, concrete things.
Embodiment.
And the most spiritual poetry, the most effective spiritual or poetry, forget spiritual.
Right.
Let's just talk poetry. It gives us images that say more than the concrete images themselves say. And therefore, let's call that the feminine side of it. But if you want to break it down into feminine and masculine, which personally I don't do, but I would say the referencing the transcendent through the concrete, talking about the transcendent through the concrete is the unification of these two dimensions.
That's lovely.
And I'll give you one example, one simple little example. The kind of when Rumi soars to the absolute heights in a couple of lines that a child could understand. He says, water says to the dirty one, come. And the dirty one says, but I'm so ashamed. Water says, how will you become clean without me?
Beautiful. Thank you. Thank you. Kirk's got the microphone. It's making its way back to the front.
Hi. Thank you. My name is Juliana. And I feel so glad and grateful to hear everything that you say. I'm from Brazil, and it seems too far, but too close, right? And one thing that I want to share with you is that I pray very much for strength to have strength and to feel strength. And it's hard to really feel that strength within me. So I would love to hear from you what strength is for you and how you melt devotion into strength. So, yeah.
Beautiful question. Thank you. I don't know if you said melt devotion into strength. I love that. I guess it feels like that alchemical fire is what you're talking about, a transmutation of a base substance, which is our pain, our vulnerability, our woundedness, our not enoughness, our too muchness. And that when we offer all of that to the flames of holy desire, it is transmuted into something golden that then we can offer to the world, or not only offer to the world, but that heals us and makes us strong. I mean, maybe that's the wrong metaphor, because gold is actually very soft and malleable, too soft, some would say. And so I guess it does work, because I think the strength of the feminine lies in the way in which we take pain into our arms and don't push it away, but actually hold it and be with it. I mean, not that males don't do that and females do that, but the feminine that transcends maleness and femaleness knows how to say yes to all of it, that nothing is orphaned and everything belongs. And in that softening of the heart, that gold is revealed, and that is our strength. Our strength is in our vulnerability and openness to being surprised, being astonished even, and our availability to beauty. And I think that's what makes us strong, is our willingness to be with what is and to be available to that which is beauty. Our softness, our shiningness. You know, last night I was trying to, I don't know if I said this earlier, I was trying to get to C.C. White last night. I'm a hero of mine. I really wanted to hear her. And I was waylaid by a couple of women, and I ended up not going because we had a very long conversation. And in that conversation, they were trying, I did say this in my talk, they were trying to help me with my new book, like how to get it out into the world in a good way, and also asking for something from me. And I just was like, oh my God, this is the feminine in action. It's not like you wrote a book. Well, I want to write a book, or I wrote 4 books and you only wrote 1. There's none of that. You know, one of these women was like a famous best-selling author, and it was just like, how can I help you? There was an intentional abdication of power in favor of connection and support. So I'm feeling like, you know, as our elders die, Father Thomas Keating just died, Reb Zalman, Shakhtar Shalomi, these are my teachers, died a few years ago. The teacher who's been with me almost my whole life, Ram Dass, is getting ready to die. Houston Smith, a huge influence on me, has recently died. And I could go on and on. I'm forgetting a couple of people who aren't well. I won't say their names. They're well known. And I feel like what's happening is, as our elders leave us, and most of them have been white men who I adore, who have given me nothing but love and support on my way. It's like this whole wave is receding, and this new landscape is emerging. And it is a liminal space. It's not yet known what the new leadership, spiritual leadership, is going to be. But what I'm feeling is that it's going to be not about a singular enlightened being dispensing the commodity of their wisdom to the rest of us poor slobs. It's going to be all of us interconnecting, or just simply recognizing the truth of our interconnection. And so it's just an accident that I happen to be sitting up here right now. It could be any of you. Each one of you, and many of you I've already glimpsed, have great wisdom that was attained under tremendous duress in many cases. Like, you suffered for what you know. I know that you have. And that is your goal. That is your alchemical gold. And it is your turn. It is all of our turn to offer it. So I think that this emerging landscape that will become clearer in the absence of our great teachers who have given us so much is going to be an interconnected landscape, and it's going to be a very feminine landscape, because enough already with the patriarchal masculine model. It's done its job, it's done fine, but it is like a carcass, and we're propping it up, and it ain't pretty. Sorry, that was a very scattered feminine answer. But
Well, I would like to start by sort of picking up where you left off, or kind of echoing you. I don't know your name. My name is Rick. Yeah, where Rick left off. So I'm going to say kind of maybe a slightly different version of what he said. Rick, no, I'm not explaining you. I'm just going to sort of pick up that theme. I'm just warning you ahead of time in case I seem repetitive. First of all, I want to say that the non-dual approach has meant a lot to me. It's what brought me here. But when you were talking earlier, and all of a sudden, when you were talking about how you sort of were sort of setting that aside in a sense, and sort of honoring another impulse in you, I started feeling like I wanted to cry. And that really kind of, I was surprised in a way I wasn't, but in a way I was, because I didn't expect it at all. So I was very touched by what you said, and I want to just really honor you for sharing that with us. And I just want to say one more thing I think about that, and that is, in the last week I was going over the program, and I read several things that you had written. I really didn't have much awareness of you before, but I spent about a day just sort of, it was a Mirabai day. I read several interviews and several articles, and I started getting excited about seeing you. I felt like you really had something that I wanted to really expose myself to. And I noticed a lot of sort of, you talked a lot about sort of feeling like you were, and I'm probably not going to do justice to your words, so please, if, don't, but I got a sense that you felt like you were having difficulty sort of honoring your different traditions adequately. And what I want to say is that I feel like, our spiritual impulses, our deepest, maybe even instincts, are really a priori to any spiritual tradition per se. And I think it's the job of the spiritual traditions, if you will, to sort of meet our needs rather than us to feel that we have to meet the needs of the spiritual traditions. And finally, one other thought, and that is that if I remember my biology correctly, I think that the feminine, the male, I think originally there was just female. There were unicellular organisms that split, and the sort of male and female sexuality was a much later evolutionary development. So I think female is the a priori, where we all come from. The feminine is the ground of our being, and maleness was a specialization that developed later. So I don't think it's male versus female. I think it's the feminine is at the root of what we are, and there is masculinity is something that developed later and adds something to it.
Beautiful. Love that. Thank you.
Thank you. You're welcome.
I'm going to just check the time. Is there a timekeeping device in this room? Okay, thank you.
I read Rabbi Rami's book, and he talks about us being in the age of Kali Yuga.
Uh-huh.
And he's Jewish, and he's saying Mother Mary keeps appearing. So I'm wondering if you talk about his life, and he talks about the Kali Yuga era.
Rami Shapiro. Yeah.
Right, Rabbi Rami Shapiro. I actually wrote a foreword to his book, The World's Wisdom Bible. Have you guys seen that, The World's Wisdom Bible? It's a beautiful collection of sacred texts from all the spiritual traditions, and his mission, he actually created a foundation, is to get that in all the motels and hotels of America. All the spiritual traditions. Like, I don't even know what you're talking about. It seems completely natural to me that we would navigate multiple spiritual spaces. However, okay, I'm really glad you brought this up. Okay, so I have been talking about saying yes to the presence of the sacred wherever we encounter it in all of these holy houses. And in some ways, I realize now, just as I am, I don't know about the rest of you, starting to wake up to my white privilege, and that I hadn't even noticed. I thought I had. I thought I was totally onto it. I grew up with activist parents in the 70s, peace activists. I adopted 2 children of color. So, like, check, Mirabai, you got those boxes checked off. I thought I was very connected to the awareness of the invisible structures of racism that prop up Western culture, and I wasn't. And I thought that the way I can blithely dance into all of these spiritual traditions and take what I like and as if it was my right, it is actually. I needed to take responsibility for that. So when people like Rabbi Rami Shapiro and Mirabai Starr speak about Kali, or I'm feeling a little less that way about Islam and about Sufism, because it's still a more dominant, it's about power, right? So Islamic cultures haven't been colonized the way India has been, for instance, or native and first world traditions have been. So, yes, I think it's beautiful that Rami Shapiro, who's my brother, can say we are in the Kali Yuga and explain what that means, and we can resonate with it. And there is a jewel of wisdom from another tradition that illumines something, a way for all of us to understand and connect with reality. And we don't have a right to just willy-nilly steal the jewels of other traditions, especially colonized cultures, as if they belong to us. So the only way I know to honor those great wisdom teachings of all spiritual traditions is to name them, to not act like we just made it up, or that it belongs to us, but to bow before these great wisdom gifts and name them. This comes from the Buddhist tradition, and this really resonates for me, and this is why. And I am in gratitude to the tradition that offers such treasures. I don't know if any of you guys have a response to this, because for me this is a living question. It's very much up right now. The minute I started questioning white privilege, it was like going down the rabbit hole, and all these other issues of appropriation and access and power differentials all started rising, and that's rising in me right now. I look around the SAND conference, this beautiful community of beings, and 90% white, privileged, and there's not like our fault, but I want to notice it, name it, and see if there is a way that we can look at ourselves first before we hope to dismantle these invisible structures that are perpetuating suffering. Okay.
I have a question about the categories of black and white and female and male. And I was wondering if the binary distinction kind of makes it smaller, and if
No.
to see it more like a continuum would be richer.
Right. Okay. So I know we're running out of time, so I feel like I can't answer that or address that. I can't answer anything, but I can't address that the way I wish I could. But that's what I think the danger is taking the essential wisdom of the non-dual teachings and reducing them to this everything is one. I mean, non-duality isn't that everything's this homogeneous, unitive thing, and that anytime we see distinctions, masculine and feminine, black and white, it means we're being dualistic and we're in illusion. To me, non-duality is recognizing the way we interpenetrate and interconnect and belong to each other. And that sometimes that results in subjective states of awareness that are undifferentiated, where we cannot make any distinctions between I and thou and masculine and feminine and color of skin. But that doesn't excuse us from the necessity of showing up for the very real issues of justice and injustice that exist in this world. I mean, it's a very privileged space to be able to say we are all one and there's no difference between us. That it, from a privileged perspective, that's much easier to say. But when we're on the margins, a continuum, yeah, okay. Well, yes, exactly. Okay, a continuum. I get that. Yeah, I get that. And
That will make a woman that is not so interconnected less feminine, for example. So that's why I have a problem with that.
I hear what you're saying. I do. Thank you. Yes, there's definitely a spectrum of masculinity and femininity, and spectrum of blackness and whiteness, all of that. Yeah.
Hi. I totally support and concur with the desperate need of social justice issues and all that is in the trauma of this country and the foundation on the genocides and the need to deal with that. And I've just come from pioneers and also spent several years in Aboriginal Australia. And in my humility, and in India, and in my humility, the Aboriginal Australian people seem to have one of the most profound responses in turning around and telling us in the midst of their genocide, you're really all Aboriginal. And how the African American people, they have their gathering space, and it's not here. And this is so much our own interpretation of our spiritual gathering place. This is our way that we have conjured to do this. They have their way and are meeting in their own sacred spaces. And they say so often, you folks need to work on yourselves.
Yes, that's what I keep hearing too.
Yeah, and so if this is how we're working on ourselves, especially those from South America, from Central America, the Amazonian people, the indigenous people, this is our part of our way of remembering our own Aboriginality.
We're almost out of time. I love what you just said. And there's one more question. Thank you so much. And I think that what we just need to add to the mix as we gather together as privileged white people, which is not everyone in this room, but is that we need to just at least become aware of these invisible structures that are perpetuating harm that we accidentally participate in. And so just naming it among ourselves is a really holy thing to do. Yeah, thanks. And last question probably? I think it went Oh, did it? Okay, so one and then two, and I'll be as brief as possible. I might just nod my head.
Well, I just was touched also by your sense, the universal mysticism, and how we're touched by many. And it keeps ringing in my head something that Eckhart had said, Meister Eckhart, of on a...
Meister Eckhart, she's saying, not Eckhart Tolle.
Yeah. On a Christmas morning in one of his sermons, that what good is it to me that Mary gave birth to Jesus if I didn't give birth to God, and I think of this, his favorite term for the soul was wife, because he thought, well, to receive the infinite, of course we're virgin, but the true expression of gratefulness is our fruitfulness, and so that sense of the feminine in terms of the ability to receive and be fertile, in terms of
Beautiful.
How we give birth to God. Anyway, that's so much of the music I was hearing in your speaking today. Thank
Very
you.
eloquently said. Thank you.
I think my question might be needing a big explanation, so maybe it's something that I talk to you about afterwards. But I just wanted to add, just to speak to this idea that African American people have their place and Aboriginal have their place and we have our place. This also is a very expensive conference to come to, and it tends to be people of color who are underprivileged and don't have the financial opportunity to come to something like this. So I just, you're talking about looking at ourselves and our white privilege. So I just wanted to put that out there as well, as why we see so many white people here.
You're absolutely right, and I think that Maurizio and Zaya are very much onto this, and yeah, so I think that will start shifting.
Just so we, as a group in this room, are also thinking that's knowing that that's going on.
Right. Thank you. So I think we're out of time. I'm just going to leave you with the Saint Teresa prayer. It's just a few lines. This is called the Bookmark Prayer of Santa Teresa de Ávila, the 16th century mystic. Nada te turbe, nada te espante, todo se pasa. Dios no se muda, la paciencia todo lo alcanza. Quien Dios tiene nada le falta, solo Dios basta. Let nothing disturb you. Let nothing frighten you. Everything passes. The beloved alone is unchanging. With patience, everything is possible. Whoever has the beloved in her heart lacks nothing. The beloved alone is enough. Thank you.